Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News, and it's quite clear that Lance Stroll's ambitions for his Aston Martin Formula 1 team do not stop at Adrian Newey. Rumours emerging today that conversations are already underway with Max Verstappen about potentially joining the team as soon as 2026. A legitimate candidate replacement for Verstappen, you've got to think, given the trajectory of where Aston Martin are trying to go and what's currently happening at Red Bull. Is it feasible that we have a Verstappen-Alonso partnership at Aston Martin over the coming years, or could it well be Verstappen-Stroll, depending on exactly where Lance Stroll's ambitions for the team really lie? Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Will this be a team that Max Verstappen genuinely considers? Because I'm sure the offer they put on the table would be rather difficult to refuse. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. Plenty of course to get into today, starting here with IndyCar's Pato O'Ward, very popular driver in that series, Mexican driver. He is going to have an FP1 outing at the Mexican Grand Prix for McLaren. That's going to be good to see, and it's happening in not that far from now, to be fair, because we have Baku this weekend, we have Singapore, then to be fair, we've got basically a month off, but then it's Austin, then it's Mexico, so it's only a few races away, but it's actually quite a long way away in terms of the overall calendar. This is a pretty big update as well. The latest indication is that Bortoleto is the favourites to get the drive at Audi alongside Nico Hülkenberg, and instead, of course, of Valtteri Bottas. That would mean there are a number of rookies on the grid next year. Sargent, of course, is gone, he was a rookie last year, but next year there's going to be Ollie Behrman on the grid, obviously Antonelli on the grid, Jack Doohan on the grid. We're pretty sure that Liam Lawson is potentially going to get a drive at RB, and maybe Bortoleto as well at Audi. That could be 5 rookies on the grid, which is going to be chaos. It's going to be exciting. It's going to be crashes. It's going to be drama. So I'm kind of there for that. So apparently at least McLaren, who basically own the rights to Bortoleto, he's a McLaren junior, but they've not got a space at their team right now. So they have given him the green lights to enter into negotiations effectively with Audi for that vacancy in 2025. Also a big update on the cost cap. I mean, a couple of years ago it was all the rage. This year, not quite as much of a big deal. They have revealed that, yep, the teams reached the cost cap and didn't breach it in terms of the actual money they spent, but there were a couple of procedural breaches from actually Honda, of course the engine side of Red Bull powertrains, or Red Bull basically, and then Alpine. So yeah, Alpine managed to actually breach the cap while still being terrible, which is quite impressive, but it seems like it's just a compliance breach, right? Like a procedural breach. So they filled in a form wrong or something to that effect anyway. So it's not like they spent too much money, but they did something wrong at some point. So presumably procedural breaches will probably not happen for that much longer, because you'd think the teams will get their head around the system. Maybe not though, who knows at this point. But the teams were below, and the 4 power unit manufacturers as well, including the ones that we just mentioned. So they're going to say, okay, yeah, we did something wrong, and they're going to pay, I imagine, some sort of fine. I think this is the way the FIA get their money as well, is they say, hey, you've got to do all these forms in this very precise way in order to reach the cost cap, and if you make some mistake somewhere, then unlucky, you're in procedural breach, and you've got to pay some sort of fine. So classic work, and this is what was talked about today, but realistically, nothing too much in that. But let's talk about this Adrian Newey situation. We looked at this picture yesterday of Adrian Newey and Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll on the right-hand side, and then Lance Stroll, of course, here in the foreground. That has been probably the comment section of every video talking about the Aston Martin thing. There are a number of comments about Lance Stroll, and for very good reason, right? Because every other aspect of the team is poised to become a championship contender, if not championship winner over the coming years. They have facilities now on par with, if not better than, many of the top teams in Formula 1. Their technical department they have is absolutely stacked now, and we'll look at that in more detail in a second, including, of course, the helmsman, Adrian Newey, as the managing technical partner. They've got Fernando Alonso, one of the best to ever do it. There's lots of reasons why Aston Martin should be an absolute force. And if they're not, it's going to be a surprise, frankly, right? If they're not a serious contender in at least let's say 2027, then it's going to be a surprise. They've got the Honda Works deal. There's so many reasons why this should be successful. But the question is, Lance Stroll's still there. He's clearly not a driver of the caliber of what every other operation in the team is. But you've got to give, it's good that Lance exists, because if he didn't, Lance Stroll wouldn't be doing all this on some level to help finance the team and, obviously give his son the best possible chance of realising, obviously, Lance's ambitions, but also Lawrence's ambitions on some level. But then again, Lance, as much as Lawrence I'm sure would want him to win the Drivers' Championship, it's probably never going to happen. Maybe a race win could be on the cards. But if another driver is on the verge of joining the team instead, then you've got to think that Lance Stroll at some point, like, there are shareholders to appease. And let's not forget, Adrian Newey himself is now a shareholder. And, with all due respect to Lance Stroll, I don't imagine that Newey is going to be like, oh yeah, definitely Lance is the best man for the job if the time comes they need to make a difficult decision. So it's been a very interesting 24 hours since this confirmation. Actually, Newey was doing what he's done over the last few days, a number of interviews that have now been published after the embargo, which is what I mentioned a couple of days ago, and actually made it quite clear to Autocar that yes, he has been quite significantly less involved in this year's development of the RB20 than he was the last two cars, which is, maybe not massively surprising, but it's certainly interesting given the way those cars have turned out over the last couple of years. He also mentioned a fair few things on the High Performance podcast with Jake Humphrey. Some things kind of controversial. He actually did mention Vettel briefly, and Jake Humphreys kind of said, hey, is Vettel going to come back? There's been rumours, and Newey says, it's pretty unlikely, but apparently they have relatively regular communications, the two of them, which I thought was kind of nice to see. He also gave a bit more clarity on why he decided not to go to Ferrari. Effectively, he talked more so about the pull factors from Aston than he did the push factors from Ferrari. I'm sure the shareholding was quite an important part of the offering of Aston. Ferrari certainly weren't going to give that up, and in many ways I think they might have read Newey's book on exactly what went wrong with certainly Williams, right, when he wasn't offered equity by Frank Williams back in the day, and obviously like what happened in Newey's career at McLaren and stuff like that. And it seems like the Aston Martin playbook has to have been effectively offered Newey the opposite of what happened in the past, which caused problems, and Ferrari weren't able to do exactly what he wanted. And obviously he also mentions, and he said this quite a few times actually, so he clearly thinks that it's a key reason, the fact that Lawrence Stroll that is critically involved in the running of the project, even on a day-to-day basis, which is not the case for any of the other majority team owners, right? So that was Newey's perspective on that, and we don't need to talk more about his constructors' titles, drivers' titles, and his race wins as an engineer, of course, not as a driver. The interesting thing is that of all the races that he has designed a car for, his win rate is something like 33%. Verstappen and Hamilton's is both about 30%. So, not a driver, but his win rate is better than the greatest champions that we've ever seen, basically. And even his win rate across the entirety of the history of Formula One is like 20% or something. Pretty ludicrous, isn't it, to think about that every Formula One race that's ever been run, about 1 in 5 have been won by a Newey car. So, and that's since 1950 all the way to the present day. And Alonso's numbers on that regard aren't too dissimilar either, actually, mainly just because there's more races nowadays than there were back then. But it is what it is. This is how things go at Aston Martin. Just to make it clear, the race put this together quite nicely, and we'll discuss why this is a rather attractive set of candidates if Max Verstappen is thinking about where he might well go next. So Lawrence Stroll is, he's the top dog. Mike Crack's the team principal. Adrian Newey now is overseeing everything in many respects as the managing technical partner. That's a level of power that Ferrari were just not able to offer, right? And Newey can effectively restructure these incredibly talented individuals below him in exactly the way that he sees fit. Now, Andy Cowell is the CEO of the entire group, and worthy of note, Andy Cowell was the man in charge when Mercedes put together their absolutely dominant engine of the 2014 turbo hybrid era regulations, and Cowell understandably was given lots of credit for that. One of the most talented power unit engineers of the recent era, Newey, obviously on the aero side. So arguably Aston have put together the most impressive power unit and aerodynamic engineers of the last 20 years, if not the last longer than that, on the same team. So it's not bad, is it, if you think about it? And of course, Cowell's going to be working, I would imagine, on the integration of the Honda power unit. There's then, of course, Bob Bell, Enrico Cardile is coming over from Ferrari, Dan Fallows, who's worked with Newey before, he's been around some time, and many other top guys as well. So that's the team. And the question is, how much can and potentially will they achieve? Next year, it's going to be too soon, let's be real. Newey only joins in March, and at that point, his focus is going to be on the 2026 car, not the 2025 project. He may have some involvement in what they might do with upgrades in the second half of the season, but the reality is it's all about 2026. In 2026, what happens, right? Is Lance Stroll going to go on a mega streak and win every world championship from now until the end of time? Unlikely. First of all, because it doesn't really, like Stroll, I think he's almost underrated. I actually think people think he's terrible. I don't think he's terrible. He's just not great. And any medium to good level driver you put in that car, he will beat Stroll over the course of a season, I would say. So, it is what it is. Stroll, if the Aston's good, can be a race winner for sure. He's nearly been there in the past, but it's not happened, unfortunately, for him and his father, and maybe it's not going to happen again, but it may well do. But the likelihood is if the Aston Martin is the rocket ship of the field and the Honda power unit is the best, it's going to be Lance's teammate that wins the championship, but Stroll will probably win a couple of races along the way. Auto sprints, let's talk about them as I click off the sign me up for the email thing. They were basically the first people to mention that Newey had signed with Aston Martin. That was the big rumour, and that's what they said. Now they're talking about the Max Verstappen situation, right? And this is the key talking point that's going on next. Of course, there's some sort of gardening leave dispute that they're discussing here, but the discussion really is now switching to this. Negotiations in progress with Max Verstappen, but as sensational as the announcement will be, Lawrence Stroll has no intention of stopping at Newey. I mean, we can guess this from the way that Lawrence Stroll is, his ambition, his commitment to doing what it takes to become the best team in Formula One. And we've not seen this in the sport for a very long time. That's what makes it so exciting, right? That someone's come in with the intention, the resources, and the ambition to actually try and make this happen. And whether it does or not, I mean, it is very interesting for the state of Formula One, really. And he's not stopping at Newey. He is targeting Max Verstappen, and apparently negotiations now are already underway with Max to try and see if this is going to happen. And let's be honest here, every week that goes by, this becomes a more and more likely possibility, because Red Bull's situation is, it's not like they can't fix their problems, but if I had to ask you guys to predict right now who is going to have the strongest car, or let's just say who is more likely to have a championship winning car in 2026, of course next year it's going to be Red Bull, but 2026, you'd probably say Aston on current evidence, right? Red Bull have lost lots of technical heads. Newey's gone, of course, which is a big deal. They seem to be floundering to some degree with their current technical team, struggling to find out where to go with this current car. And for various reasons, things are kind of downhill in the Red Bull camp. And sure, Aston Martin isn't exactly great. Their current car isn't a dominant machine, and it's not really moving massively in the right direction. But that's pre-wind tunnel coming into effect. That's pre-massive facility coming online, which it will be for the development of the 2026 car. And we've just looked at all the names they now have in their unit, and they've got Fernando Alonso too. So, there's a good few reasons why they should be in a great spot, and arguably would be favoured even right now over Red Bull to produce a stronger car in 2026. And if Verstappen and Jos Verstappen comes to a similar conclusion, then maybe, I wouldn't say the deal is already done, but I will say that Toto Wolff absolutely has a challenge on his hands in terms of whether it's possible for him to actually secure Max Verstappen's signature if he does decide he wants to leave. So, look, it seems like Verstappen's team are at least in some early preliminary conversations with the team to potentially make that work. It's worthy to note that if you're Verstappen, it works both ways, because Verstappen has made it quite clear he doesn't want to stay in Formula One forever. His current contract with Red Bull technically ends at the end of 2028, but if things were to go downhill for Red Bull, which maybe they currently are, then he would be able to leave early, and other options would be there. The interesting part that the article went on to mention, though, is that Lance Stroll would probably be the one to be cut, right? Because Alonso is signed for 2026, and if Verstappen became available, it's believed that they wouldn't cut Alonso. They would instead just say, look, Lance, it's been a good ride, but, and look, it would be difficult, I'm sure, for Lawrence to do this, but it would be the correct decision, and the decision that the shareholders would likely support, to say, look, it's time, Lance, to go and do WEC. That's another advantage that Max would have and Newey would have in these negotiations, or at least maybe Aston would have with those guys, is that they can offer them other things. Aston are involved in their WEC program. The Valkyrie exists. There's other projects they're going to be doing. There's other things for Newey to sink his teeth into. There's other things for Max to get involved in with the Aston Martin project, right? So there's so many factors in play why it's going to be an attractive prospect for these guys. And the rumour has it that, yes, Stroll would be the one to make way, and they would be running effectively a Verstappen-Alonso partnership in 2026, which, I mean, look, Alonso, as good as he is, I think realistically a 45-year-old Alonso is going to have a pretty tough time against Verstappen, but, I'd still be there for it, and it'd be spectacular, especially in that newer generation of cars. But it's crucial to note for Verstappen that this is a very interesting statistic, and maybe it'll change. But every driver that has won a title in a car designed by Adrian Newey has never won another title after parting ways with him. And every team that Newey has left has gone downhill, basically, after he's left. And, I mean, we almost saw that at Red Bull overnight, it felt like, as soon as he announced his departure. So, look, this is true for Mansell, for Prost, for Damon Hill, for Villeneuve, for Hakkinen, and obviously for Vettel as well, that once they're no longer designing or driving Newey-designed cars, it kind of goes downhill. So that's what you've got to wonder with Verstappen as to whether Max thinks, okay, the 2024 car was still a Newey-designed car on some level, the 2025 car effectively won't be, although maybe Newey will have had like a slight part to play in the 2025 car, and then obviously at that point Max may have won the championship, may not have done, but at that point, if you're not teaming up with Newey again into 2026, you might be making a mistake really, if at least you have the option to do so. And you've got the Honda partnership that has worked very well for Max and for Newey over the last few years, so you know, there's just lots of reasons why, if I'm Toto and if I'm Christian, I'm pretty damn concerned right now, because Max not only has one viable option in Mercedes, he now has two viable options in Aston Martin as well, and arguably if I'm Toto, Aston's offer might be more credible than mine. I mean, if I'm Mercedes, all I can say is, well, you know, historically, our engine's been great, we know what we're doing, we've been these placing in the championships for the last several years, we're going to get back to the top again, but you know, is there much evidence that Mercedes are more likely to win the 2026 championship than Aston Martin are? You know, you'd probably say Mercedes are favoured over Aston to do so because of, you know, history and stuff like this. But, you know, when you look at it from another perspective, in the same way that Hamilton was convinced that Mercedes was the place to go by Niki Lauda when he joined, and why he's been convinced to join Ferrari right now, there would be plenty of reasons that would be very compelling to Max, and clearly they were to Newey, that joining this team is exactly the right thing to do. So massively intrigued to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comments section below. Of course, we go to Baku this upcoming weekend. The fastest ever speed was recorded at 366 miles an hour, kilometers an hour here. That would be crazy. 366 kph. But of course, Valtteri Bottas back in 2016. But it's been Charles Leclerc that over the last 3 years has taken pole every single time. But every time somebody else has won, namely a Red Bull driver. Interestingly enough, Sergio Perez has more podiums at this track. He has 5 podiums at this track than Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton do combined. They only have 2 each. So Sergio Perez is the king of Baku. He's won here a couple of times, the only driver to do it, and it is the one circuit on the calendar that suits his driving style better than any other. So the European leg is now over, and maybe Perez is going to be back. And if he is, maybe the Constructors' Championship is still on, but doubtful, because McLaren are seemingly quite far ahead. But very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.